Hello, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. My name is Susan Oxtoby, and welcome to Infinite Horizons, the films of Werner Herzog, a 4-month-long retrospective at BAMPFA. And we have the great honor this weekend of launching the series with a very intensively scheduled in-person visit with Werner Herzog. The series obviously represents a wonderful chance to hear from him about his work in cinema and also his work in literature. Werner Herzog has just published the English version of his memoir, Every Man for Himself and God Against All, a remarkable work that's beautifully written, published by Penguin Random House, available in our store and other good sellers. And this afternoon we present the Mosse Lecture, Werner Herzog in conversation with Deniz Göktürk. I want to thank the German department at UC Berkeley for co-presenting this series with us. It's a huge honor to work with them and with Deniz. And our film series sponsors, Peter Washburn and Jim and Ruth Reynolds, who are very committed to our film program here at BAMPFA and generously help sponsor this series. Deniz Göktürk is a professor of German and film at UC Berkeley. She's a dear colleague and a frequent collaborator with BAMPFA's film program. She's worked with us on our Alternative Visions series, on the Documentary Voices series, on the 2018-2019 visit of Ulrike Ottinger here, who she also presented a Mosse lecture. And it's, I should just say that Deniz's own areas of focus include German literature, German cinema, transnational cinemas, and the politics and poetics of migration and globalization, among many other areas of study. So it's a pleasure to welcome Deniz Göktürk to introduce this afternoon's program.
Hello. Good afternoon to you all. I would like to welcome you all really warmly to our 5th Mosse lecture here at Berkeley. Welcome also to our remote listeners, both present and in posterity. The Mosse Lectures would not be possible without support from the Mosse Foundation. I would like to extend big thanks to Roger Strauch for generously supporting the Mosse Lectures at Berkeley. And they are devoted to the commemoration of this influential Jewish-German family, their patronage of the arts, and their contributions to intellectual life in Berlin and beyond. In particular, we're thinking of Rudolf Mosse with his publishing house and the newspaper Berliner Tageblatt. And I must say, I cannot imagine a more suitable speaker for our annual Mosse lecture than Werner Herzog. So we are here at the beautiful Barbara Osher Theater at the Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archive, where a big retrospective of Herzog's films was off to a great start yesterday. And many thanks to Susan Oxtoby and all the staff here at BAMPFA for making today's event and the whole retrospective of Werner Herzog films possible. I have to say this, upholding a culture of collective film viewing and conversation is so important, as cinemas all around us have been closing down. And we really appreciate the space and all your work to keep it going. Thank you. So today, on Veterans Day, we are here with Werner, who really needs no introduction. Some of the students from my course on documentary forms are here too. Hello, students. and the theater is full of fans, all in great anticipation. I believe we even have an audience member who remembers you, Werner, as a phenomenal soccer player at the Oberhausen Film Festival. So as you all know, Werner Herzog has had an amazingly productive career, always on to new frontiers. He has made over 70 films across all continents over 6 decades. Recently, there have been big retrospectives and exhibitions celebrating his work in Berlin, Amsterdam, Los Angeles, and many other cities. He's been interviewed by many famous talk show hosts. And as we've heard already, Werner is no stranger to Berkeley. Some of you will remember that he ate his shoe at the University Theater in Berkeley on the opening of Errol Morris's Gates of Heaven. That must have been 1978, right? Les Blanc documented the event. And then back in fall 2004, one day before Thanksgiving, he generously visited my class on campus as he was finishing the sound recording for Grizzly Man, which came out in 2005, down at the Solzhenitsyn studio, right? And Tom Luddy was still with us then. You've been wonderfully generous, and it's great to have you back. Let's give Werner a very warm welcome to Berkeley. So, in addition to writing screenplays for his many films, Werner has published several books of prose over the decades. And we've brought some books here. So, Vom Gehen auf Eis, of Walking on Ice, The Conquest of the Useless, The Twilight World. He has also translated Michael Ondatier's The Collected Works of Billy the Kid into German. Another book, The Future of Truth, Die Zukunft der Wahrheit, is forthcoming in February. So clearly, Werner has been a writer-director all along, probing the limits of language and representation, which is in line with his insistence on poetic truth in cinema. So the latest of his prose works is his memoir, already mentioned by Susan, Jeder für sich und Gott gegen alle, Every Man for Himself and God Against All, about which we will be hearing more today. I read it in German. The English edition translated by Michael Hoffman is just fresh from the press. It's a wonderful book. It has been met with enthusiastic resonance. In a preliminary phone call, as we were trying to plan how to structure today's lecture conversation, Werner surprised me by saying, "No film clips or images at this lecture." People know that by now people know that I make films. They can watch the films in the retrospective. But nobody realizes that my books will probably outlive my films. So let's keep the conversation focused on literature. The students at my Rogue Film School are all required to read the Poetic Edda. So it's
and some other books, of course, yeah. Virgil,
obviously,
Georgics, and some other stuff.
We'll get to those. Yeah. So it strikes me as ironic that in our age of all-pervasive moving images which surround us on screens of all sizes, as we are witnessing the extinction of languages and the closure of libraries, it needed a renowned filmmaker to come and remind us of the value of books. So, and so we are going to focus on writing and reading today. So this lecture is, plotted as a counterpoint to the film retrospective or a complementary moment. So it will also include reading some passages from the books. So Werner, in a recent interview, you end with, "Films are my voyage and writing is home." So what do you mean by that?
I think it describes it in a very simple formula, and we should not try to talk it to bits and pieces. Films, yes, I have been my voyage, and I have been a lot around. Writing is home. It's as simple as I can say it. And I'm trying to get one point across. Deep in my soul, I'm a poet. And I realized that I was a poet very early on, 15, 16 years old. And I describe, for example, in my memoirs, a moment where my destiny became known to me. And I keep saying it may sound like a provocation to you, but it is not. I'm a writer who coincidentally also makes films. That's what I am. And this kind of affinity to language and affinity to my own background, German literature, German poetry, has been forming me, and of course literature of other countries, including United States. And I would name, for example, Hemingway, in particular the short stories, the first 49 stories. And Hemingway published it in chronological order, but knowing that his very, very best that he ever wrote, which is The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber, he put in first position so that you get hooked to the book. And The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber is one of the books of the mandatory list that filmmakers, young filmmakers who want to deal with me have to read. And they have to read, for example, I brought it here with me, Virgil's Georgics. I'm not speaking of the Aeneid. The Aeneid is more the programmatic, great epic poem about the celebration of the new Augustan Empire, celebration of the origins of the Roman Empire, which is great, some of the greatest ever written, but even deeper and better and is the Georgics, because Virgil grew up in northern Italy near Mantua, in a small farm, and he knows exactly what he's writing about in the Georgics. It's about agriculture, and it's arguably the greatest of all poems ever written. You can argue, yes, Hafiz, the Persian poet, or some others, fine, yes. We have to accept that in various cultures there's great poetry, but some of the defining poetry comes from Virgil, and that's on the list. And by the way, also the Warren Commission report on the assassination of Kennedy, not so much for its literary value, but it's one of the greatest crime stories ever written, and it is written in a way that is so stringent in its logic. The logical deduction is phenomenal, and there's no book like this around. And everybody speaks the Warren Commission report, and it's all the government, and they are all into conspiracy theories. But it's really worthwhile to read it. It is worthwhile. So, and to understand storytelling of a crime story, you better read the Warren report and some other things. What else? For example, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who was a footman during the military campaign of Cortés, during the conquest of Mexico. And when he was old, he wrote his report about it, which is absolutely and totally incredible and very, very good. So I try to make understood those who want to make films have to read, and not only those who want to make films, I keep telling that to anyone who is into architecture or into the classics or into, you just name it, read. Only then you will understand the fabric of the world conceptually, and you will understand language and storytelling, and you will understand things that are deeper than, let's say, everyday politics. You will have a position from where you can survey what is going on around you. So for film students who do not read, it would be a lost cause to even admit them to film school. Just don't admit them to film school if they do not read. They all will make films, but mediocre films at best.
Well, thank you. That was a strong plaidoyer. So maybe let's come back for a bit to the memoir. In it, you write really vividly about your childhood with your mother and brothers in a remote Bavarian mountain village, with the war and the post-war on the horizon, poverty and hunger, landscape and ghosts, a life with no technology, no cars, no phone, no cinema, but nonetheless great intensity. So beyond such insights into your biography, and also then later on the behind the scenes of the film productions, the book offers remarkable reflections condensed in very concrete images, combining recollections from the past with contemplations about the future. So what struck me...
Some of it is not description of events. It's more inner events, inner landscapes.
Landscapes of the mind,
of the soul, not of the mind, of the. I would use the old-fashioned landscape of the soul.
Right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it also what I found really interesting in reading this book is how you configure the passage of time, not chronologically, but moving back and forth. So maybe we could hear an example of that. One of those
talked about very early in the book. I describe a moment
actually that also resonates with the film screened yesterday, Signs of Life, because I believe it is a moment, inspired by that the island of Kos.
But I'm writing about the island of Crete. In this time, I made my first long feature film on the island of Kos, and some essential part on the island of Crete, where I stumbled across a valley with 10,000 windmills, and it's not an exaggeration. It was actually called the Valley of the 10,000 Windmills, because it had probably some 10,000, and it's beyond belief. And I thought I was insane when I saw it. But that came, I think, shortly later. I'm describing here a moment on the island of Crete. I had seen some two men who had killed each other in the night, because there was still blood feud on this island, in this remote, archaic area. And at night, I would help out fishermen. They would pull out small skiffs, small boats, and leave them, 5 or 6 of them, leave them in a circle in the open ocean. And they had very strong carbide lamps, which would illuminate the deep water and attract fish, and in particular calamaris or cuttlefish. And there was a moment which was completely unforgettable, and I describe it here. The first few hours were spent in silence, waiting until eventually the artificial moon of the lamps began to take effect. Above me was the orb of the cosmos, stars that I felt I could reach up and grab. Everything was rocking me in an infinite cradle, and below me, lit up brightly by the carbide lamp, was the depth of the ocean, as though the dome of the firmament formed a sphere with it. Instead of stars, there were lots of flashing silvery fish, bedded in a cosmos without compare, above, below, all around, a speechless silence. I found myself in a stunned surprise. I was certain that there and then I knew all there was to know. My fate had been revealed to me, and I knew that after one such night it would be impossible for me to ever get any older. I was completely convinced I would never see my 18th birthday because, lit up by such grace as I now was, there could never be anything like ordinary time for me again. So it's a very deep sensation in me, and I felt like illuminated. And by the way, I was not completely wrong. I think I was just barely 17. I was convinced I would not see my 18th birthday, which was almost correct because I almost died trying to cross from southern Sudan into eastern Congolese provinces at the time of the Congo crisis. And that was a time when all principles of order had vanished and tribal warfare was there. Cannibalism was back. It was undescribable and a situation that we have not seen for a very, very long time. And I never made it across the border into the Congo because I felt very, very ill in southern Sudan and almost died, and scrambled back to Aswan in southern Egypt, where they were still finishing the Aswan Dam. And then I saw my 18th birthday, and then I was sure I would never see my 25th. My lifestyle was kind of very risky, and I knew I would not become older than 25. Now I'm still around. I was wrong.
Yeah. We are very glad you're still with us. So the passage is so rich because it's one of those moments of vision that stands out from ordinary time, and that also seems to sort of become the kind of inception point for filmic images, right? Often. But I was wondering about something else. I was wondering, how does it feel to you reading your text in English? I believe you also recorded the audiobooks both in German and English in your own voice. But you live in LA. You've become an American as much as a German filmmaker. You're perfectly fluent and expressive in English, but you still write your books in German. And
right? You should not forget, Deniz, that English was my fourth or fifth language, and I learned it fairly late in my life. So my language was Bavarian dialect, which was so heavy that for my own father, who didn't speak Bavarian, he needed translations. And then, of course, in school, I was teased for my dialect, and I had to learn proper German. And then, of course, in school, ancient Greek and Latin 9 years, ancient Greek 6 years, and at the very end, a little bit English. So it came very late in my life. But I do live in the United States, and I do live in California, in Los Angeles. So, of course, it is my adopted environment, my adopted language. And with my wife, who did not grow up with English either, we both chose to speak English to each other, so that it's not her domain nor my domain. And we are very cautious with language. So in 25 years of being together, 28 years of being together, there was never a word of foul language. Never. Not once. Not a single time. Because we are cautious with language. We are meeting. It's a meeting ground. And it has been good for marriage. And I'm very much for marriage, because I'm one of the few men far and wide who is happily married. So I've been very, very lucky. So I'm an advocate of marriage. And of course, much in marriage, beyond love, is very simple. Maintenance, the daily attention to things, including language. So, and that has shaped my English in a way, although I know my accent cannot be worse. And I don't mind. I would lose my character if I tried to pronounce everything correctly. So it's just me. And the language itself, you can find it also in my prose. There's something which is has a certain Bavarian peasant force in it. The same way and I feel very much reminded of the reformer Martin Luther, with his Bible translation. The Bible translation of 1540s has this kind of Frühneuhochdeutsch, early New High German, and he actually shaped our language. Before Martin Luther, there were only dialects in German language. He unified the language. It's an artificially created language by Martin Luther. And the force of this very, very strong intellect resonates in me much more than, for example, the romantic poems resonate in me, or the expressionist poets resonate in me. So you have to see it a little bit in that tradition.
Yeah, so those would be literary inspirations. So it seems like German is still very much also your Latin or medium of poetic expression, and so it carries a certain.
But with all the influences, and one of the influences, for example, is one of the mandatory books of the Rogue Film School, and I read a very short passage to you from the Poetic Edda, some 1,000 years back in time. However, the tradition was oral and probably goes back 2 millennia. And it's the beginning of the Poetic Edda, which is very beautifully translated by Lee M. Hollander. And it has a resonance in my soul, in a way, although it's Icelandic, and it speaks here of the origin, the creation of the world. In earliest times did Ymir live, nor was nor sea nor land, nor salty waves, neither earth was there, nor upper heaven, but a gaping nothing, and green things nowhere. Was the land then lifted aloft by Búr's sons, who made Midgard, the matchless earth? How beautiful that is, the matchless earth. Shone from the south, the sun on dry land, on the ground then grew the green sward soft. From the south the sun, by the side of the moon, heaved its right hand over heaven rim. The sun knew not what seat he had, actually masculine, the sun. The sun knew not what seat he had, The stars knew not what stead they held. The moon knew not what might she had. So it goes on. It's just very, very, very intense poetry. It's essential, and this kind of essential poetry has shaped me. It has shaped me much more than, let's say, cinema, because cinema I did not know until I was 11. I did not even know that it existed. I did not know. And of course, tools of communication are part of reading, unknown to me. I made my first phone call when I was 17. It's inconceivable for young people today that I made my first phone call at 17, but at 19 I made my first film. And before I was 19, I had written poetry already. And I had written, I had started a novel which was never finished, but I was a writer, a poet in deep inside.
Yeah, I mean, you also this passage, it points to your interest in these creation myths in an almost cosmic consciousness, and it seems like also in your films there is this combining human scale with a planetary time, right? Thinking in planetary time. And that's why you keep going back also to these the Luther.
And in this context, it's interesting because in the memoirs I'm describing, in the last chapter I'm describing a time where human beings do not exist anymore on our planet. Maybe some 200,000 years from now. Yeah, I can read it in a second. And of course, one of the places for pilgrimage for me, many times I have visited the dam of Vaillant, of the gorge of Vaillant, which is 180 meters tall in a very narrow gorge. And a catastrophe happened in 1963 or 64. It must be anniversary of now, by now. What happened is they filled the reservoir with water, and despite warnings by a geologist that the slopes on either side, the very steep slopes, were not stable, the dam was still built, and what happened when it almost was filled, the largest landslide since Neolithic times came down. 2.5 kilometers of the flank of the mountain rushed into the water, tossed it high up. A village that was 250 feet, 800 feet, 250 meters, 800 feet or so on the opposite slope was wiped out by a tsunami wave. And it went over the dam, and the dam withstood the onslaught of 250 million cubic or 650 million cubic meters of rock and stone and earth. And a tsunami came down in this gorge, a tsunami 250 meters high, and came down a few kilometers and swept across a valley of the river Piave and swept up on the hill of the city of Longarone and wiped it out. So 2,900 people died in this tsunami, and I have been back there again and again because it will be one of the things remaining as something that we have built. The pyramids will long be gone in 200,000 years or so, but probably the foundation of the dam is still going to be there. It's 28 meters thick, reinforced concrete and steel, and it's probably going to be there. And a time when there is no images anymore, a time when there are no human beings anymore. And by the way,
the last chapter is called
yes,
The End of Images.
End of Images, yeah. And actually, what is also strange is the book ends in mid-sentence. But I Yes, but I describe it as a warning. I describe it in the foreword because people would be puzzled and send the book back to the publisher. You sent me an incomplete text. I describe actually the last Japanese soldier, Hiro Onoda, who surrendered 29 years after the end of the Second World War, still believing that the war was on and fighting a fictitious war. And he had survived 111 ambushes. And he described to me about time and about future, that you can see the future for a split of a second. And he describes a bullet was fired at him and came at him with the sun very low. And for a split of a second, he sees the bullet like a tracer round, glowing orange coming at him. And there's no time to duck. He rotated his body to the side and it whizzed by. It would have hit his solar plexus. And I was in the middle of the writing and I knew it was the last chapter. And all of a sudden something comes shooting at me, straight at me. And I looked up in surprise, but it was not a stray bullet. It was a hummingbird, glowing in orange and green iridescent. And sometimes they come very fast and very straight. And I had stopped writing in the middle of the sentence. And then I looked back at the text and I decided, no, I will not write any further. What if a real bullet had taken me out? So it ends in, it's totally unusual. The text ends in mid-sentence. But I'm going to read you about time and about my vision about the end of time, the end of images, the end of pretty much everything. And it is called the end of images, the last chapter. I try to imagine a world without books like this one. For decades now, people have stopped reading. Yes, I have, and it's a catastrophe. For decades now, people have stopped reading. Even university students no longer read. This development is a result of tweets and texts and short videos. What will a world be like with hardly any spoken languages, which are becoming extinct in their profusion and variety? What will a world be like without a profound language of pictures, where my profession no longer exists? The end is coming. I picture a radical turning away from thought, argument, and image, not just an approaching darkness in which certain objects can still be felt, but a condition where they no longer exist at all, a darkness filled with fear, with imaginary monsters. I think of a passage in the Florentine Codex written as though its speakers, amid the destruction of their culture and horizons, were still trying to find their way to their language. Quote, "A cave is terrifying, a place of terror, a place of death. It will be called the place of death because people will die here. It is a place of darkness, dark, always dark. It stands there with mouth gaping open." How could one depict the absence of images, not just their removal, the final irrevocable turning away from images, but their non-existence? I imagine two mirrors set up in exact opposition, reflecting nothing but each other into infinity, but with nothing for them to mirror. If the mirrors were one-way mirrors, like the kind that detectives use for interrogations, then you would see a void reflected in the mirror opposite. No criminal confessing, no table, no chair, no lamp, just space containing nothing that is reflected over and over again. Nothing else. No living, no breathing. No Frenchman eating his bicycle. No second Frenchman switching into reverse and driving his ancient car backward through the Sahara Desert. Actually, both existed. No truth, no lie. No river called the River of Lies, Yuya Pitchis, the deceiving river that pretends to be the much larger Pitchis River. No Japanese marriage agency ordering a bucket full of sand to be emptied out of a satellite so the bride can be astonished by a shower of meteorites. No more twins living in separate bodies, but thinking and speaking in unison. No parrots from Alexander von Humboldt's 1802 journey up the Orinoco, where he came to a village, all of whose inhabitants had been killed off by a plague. Their language had died with them, but the neighboring village had for the past 40 years continued to look after their parrot. This parrot still spoke 60 distinct words of the inhabitants of the dead village, their dead language. Humboldt copied them down in his notebook. What if we thought those words to two parrots, and the two could converse in them? What if we project ourselves far into the future and imagine things that we have created that still exist, not forever, but for 200,000 years, let's say, a time when humanity will almost certainly have died out, but certain of our monuments might still exist, indestructible. The dam at the Vaillant Gorge that withstood the vast landslide of 250 million cubic meters of rocks and earth and gravel. At its foot, this dam is 28 meters thick and poured from specially hardened concrete. This lower part would still almost certainly be there, standing majestically without relaying any message, no message for anyone. There, at the foot of the smooth concrete wall, there would be a crystal clear trickle of water from the rocks to the side. It would be sought out by herds of deer as though, and here it ends the text in the middle. So, and of course it picks up on this creation of the world or end of the world and what is going to remain of us. And I'm very generous when I'm thinking about, let's say, 200,000 years from now. We almost certainly will not be around anymore, probably much quicker. It will happen much quicker than that because of two major things. Number one, biologically, we are very fragile creatures. So cockroaches or lizards or microbes are much more robust. And secondly, we have something innate, inborn in us that is self-destructive. So I don't see a very long existence of the human species on this planet. By the way, it doesn't make me nervous.
Yeah, that's the key. I think that you engage in this really far-ranging archaeology from the first records of human creativity and figuration in cave paintings to all the way to digital simulation. and you're able to think from the vantage point of extinction, but still maintaining this sense of curiosity and wonder and also humor, right? So that's remarkable in this
of
passage.
course, always a sense of awe, because that's where poetry begins and where cinema begins, and that's where actually human life begins. That's where we are centered as with our souls, if we can speak of souls at all. But I'm using this old-fashioned word.
Yeah. So I mean, the whole process of reading, writing, image making then becomes a process of reciprocal illumination and creative association. But it's also interesting to go back to a really early text of yours, where that was already all kind of at work. The Vom Gehen im Eis, walking in ice, which is the walk from, it's based on a real walk from Bavaria to Paris, to the dying Lotte Eisner. And it's an amazing text. I reread it, and these observations about winter landscape in a very wild, almost Dadaist stream of consciousness mixed with daydream images, random details, and moments of illumination again. And you will see correspondences between this text and also the phantasmagoric style of Fata Morgana, the 1971 film that it will be screening after this afternoon. And of course, Lotte Eisner did read the Mayan creation myth that is featured
in Fata Morgana, which is playing this afternoon here. Mm-hmm. She had a very remarkable voice, and I loved her voice. And that's through her voice I discovered her. I was walking by an auditorium during the Berlin Film Festival, I think. She delivered a speech and the door was half open, and I walked by and I heard her voice, and I was immediately struck. And I approached and I saw it was all packed with people, and I saw Lotte Eisner speaking. And I have to explain, she was a great person of literature and of cinema. She has written about cinema, for example, a book called The Haunted Screen, about German expressionist cinema. And everyone of importance in cinema knew her. And she was admired by everyone, by Fritz Lang and the Lumière, even the Lumière brothers, and Eisenstein and Pudovkin and Jean Renoir and the American filmmakers, and you just name it, everyone, and the young generation. And she somehow saw something in my films and supported me and encouraged me. And she was some sort of a mentor, and very much in danger by the barbaric rise of the Nazis, and she fled on the very day of Hitler's taking power in 1933, and lived in hiding in France, and had also been very intensely working for the French Cinematheque. And when she was dying, I received a call, "Come quickly, Lotte is dying." And I looked into flight schedules and I immediately stopped that, and I said, "Now I will come on foot. 1,000 kilometers or so, almost 1,000 kilometers. If I come on foot, she will not die. She must not die. I will not allow her. She is not going to die because she is not going to die." And I come on foot. And I came on foot. She didn't know that I was traveling on foot to her. And she was out of hospital. So it was like a a pilgrimage, a rebellion against the fact that she was going to die. And she was almost 80 years old. And then she summoned me later, some 8 years later. She said, come, but take a train, a night train this time. And which I did. And she said to me, now I'm almost blind. The joy of my life, reading, I cannot do that anymore. The joy of my life, seeing cinema, it's over. I can barely walk, I'm on crutches. And she said it very biblically, I'm saturated with life now. But there's still this spell upon me that I must not die. And I said, Lotte, the spell is lifted hereby. And she died 8 days later, which was good. I had no problem anymore. And she died at a good and right moment. And
she actually, she wrote, her memoir, Ich hatte einst ein schönes Vaterland, I once had a beautiful fatherland, was put into writing by Martje Grohmann with an afterword, I think, or a preface, I forget now, by Werner Herzog, published in 1984. And I think it's a model memoir, although Werner claims he never read the book itself. It's a model memoir when it comes to not taking oneself too seriously, and also in terms of its organization of temporality. It also has this kind of moving back and forth in time. It's and there are several places where she comments on Werner's early films, Signs of Life, and also Fata Morgana in it. Yeah.
And Deniz, you thought about, was it this text here?
Yes.
Can you have a look? Or
I was thinking from here, maybe.
Okay.
So that
try my best.
winter
Okay,
landscape.
Yes. Well, it was an onslaught of winter. Winter came very early that year, and there was always storm against me. And when you bicycle against strong gales or a storm, it's really hard. But it's equally hard to walk against a winter storm. And I'm describing here a passage. Okay. And of course, there's a tradition in German literature of winter travel, and you probably teach it in your courses, or you point it out. So it's early in the voyage. Outside in the cold, the first cows. I moved. There's asphalt around the dung heap, which is steaming. Then 2 girls traveling on roller skates. A jet black cat. 2 Italians pushing a wheel together. This strong odor from the fields. Ravens flying east. The sun quite low behind them. Fields soggy and damp, forests, many people on foot, a shepherd dog steaming from the mouth, Alling 5 kilometers, for the first time a fear of cars. Someone has burned illustrated papers in the field, noises as if church bells were ringing from spires. The fog sinks lower, a haze. I'm stock still between the fields. Mopeds with young farmers are rattling past. Further to the right, toward the horizon, many cars because the soccer match is still in progress. I hear the ravens, but a denial is building up inside me. By all means, do not glance upward. Let them go. Don't look at them. Don't lift your gaze from the paper. No, don't. Let them go, those ravens. I won't look up there now. Similar sort of incantations that Lotte Eisner must not die. Just a few pages later, I think so. I won't look up there now. A glove in the field, soaking wet, and cold water lying in the tractor tracks. The teenagers on their mopeds are moving toward death in synchronized motion. I think of unharvested turnip, but by God, there are no unharvested turnips around. A tractor approaches me, monstrous and threatening, hoping to maul me, to run me over, but I stand firm. Pieces of white styrofoam packaging to my side give me support. Across the plowed field, I hear faraway conversations. There is a forest, black and motionless. The transparent moon is halfway to my left, that is toward the south. Everywhere still, some single-engine aircraft take advantage of the evening before the goon comes. 10 steps further, the business that stalketh about in the dark will come on Saint Oblivion's day. Where I am standing lies an uprooted black and orange signpost, its direction as determined from the arrow is northeast. Near the forest, utterly inert figures with dogs. The region I'm traversing is infested with rabies. If I were sitting in the soundless plain right above me, I would be in Paris in 1.5 hours. Who is chopping wood? Is that the sound of a church clock? So now onward. So it's very strange what happens when you're traveling on foot, because coherent observations somehow and coherent thought normally starts to unravel. And you see it in travel literature very often, and you see it, for example, in the poetry of Hölderlin, who has been much on foot. And he traveled from the city of Bordeaux in western France, southwestern France, all the way, I think, to Frankfurt or Tübingen. And en route he became insane. And his observations, his language is unraveling, and it's coming apart, and it becomes fragmentary. And language itself is becoming somehow not right anymore, and yet he tries to hold language together. And in my language, German, no poet has ever gone to the utter margins, to the outermost margins of my language than Hölderlin. And he's such a great poet and has written such beautiful poems. And of course, this kind of traveling, I imagine him traveling on foot and the language not being right anymore. And the same thing happened with me with Lotte Eisner at the end. When I arrived, I had traveled 85 kilometers non-stop, a whole day, a whole night, and another almost full day. And I arrived and was really tired and kind of speechless. And I said something very strange to her, and I describe it in the last chapter of my book of Walking in Ice. I said to her something very strange, and my language was not coherent anymore. I said something, and I will read this very moment for you, because some translators have tried later to correct my wrong German. And I said, in the embarrassment of thought, just 1 second. In the embarrassment, a thought passed through my head. And since the situation was strange anyway, I told it to her. Together, I said, we shall boil fire and stop fish. You see, you boil water, but you do not boil fire. And you stop the traffic, and you do not stop fish, you catch fish. So together, I said, we shall boil fire and stop fish. Then she looked at me and smiled very delicately. And since she knew that I was alone on foot and therefore unprotected, she understood me. For one splendid fleeting moment, something mellow flowed through my deadly tired body. I said to her, open the window. From these last days onward, I can fly. That's how the book ends. So,
beautiful.
I would like to give you Hölderlin, but...
let's end with the Hölderlin poem, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience.
But it is a poem where his language was still together, and where you feel the desperate onslaught, desperate fear of the onslaught of madness. And it is called Hälfte des Lebens, a fairly short poem, half of life. With its yellow piers and wild roses everywhere, the shore hangs in the lake. O gracious swans, and drunk with kisses, you dip your heads into the sobering holy water. Ah, where will I find flowers come winter, and where the sunshine and shade of the earth? Walls stand cold and speechless. In the wind, the weather vanes creak. So it can't get any better.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And only 3 weeks ago, I was allowed at the archive, the German Literary Archive, to hold in my hand a handwritten poem by Hölderlin. And I still feel this shiver of awe to see something he had written in his long hand and hold it in my hand.
So, maybe this is the time to open it up for questions. We have about 20 minutes. There will be microphones coming to you. Yes, over there.
So I read your book, The Twilight World, which is described as a novel about the Japanese soldier that you spoke about earlier.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I read your book, The Twilight World, which is described as a novel based on the life of the Japanese soldier that you spoke about. When you find a subject you want to explore, how do you decide whether to explore it through fiction or nonfiction? And then how do you decide whether to explore it through text or film?
That's a very interesting question, because everyone immediately said to me, you have to make a film with him or about him after he died. And I said, no, it takes away from the depth of Onoda and about the notion of time, which you cannot portray in cinema. You can do it in form of literature, yes. Passage of time, standstill of time, and we had conversations about the present time, which is a fiction. You see, he fought a fictitious war, but he kept pointing out that much of what we are doing is formulaic, is fictitious, is almost like ghost written. Why do we behave in church when we in a church service? Why do we behave in formations and saluting at the same moment when we serve in the military? So we live some sort of fictitious norms that are almost like ghost written. And he says, in particular, we are lying to ourselves in terms of times, because present time is a fiction. Technically, it cannot exist, because when he moved his leg from the mud, lifted it up, and it was up here, this moment of lifting it up is already past. Putting it down in the mud is already present, is already future. So, and let's say from here to here, only 1 inch of movement is also, behind it is past, in front of it is future. And it can go more minimal and minimal until infinity. So present time technically cannot exist. And yet we live in present time. We lie, or we create a fictitious form of notion of time, the present time, because otherwise human life would not be livable. We need this fiction. We need all this. And of course it is something that you don't create in a film. And I said, no, I should write a book. I should write it. And strangely enough, now there is some interest from animated books, an American and Japanese company, because that has much more fantasy in it, much more fantasy, for example, than a documentary film could allow. So it's a very interesting question here, and we can only scratch the surface. But no, I've never planned to make a film, and if ever there's a film, it might become an animated version of it. Okay.
In the middle, the microphone is coming.
Do you think that cinema can achieve the depth and the profundity of poetry? And if so, is this something that you have aspired to in your own filmmaking, or can you talk about other films that you, or filmmakers who have attained that?
Attained what? Didn't?
Well, I can't say an equivalent, but something that would be on the level of great poetry.
Well, that's hard to sift through, let's say, history of literature and then films. Some films are better than the literary basis of it, no doubt. There was fairly lousy literature, like, for example, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is not really great literature, but I made a film that is much better than Bram Stoker. And sometimes you have literature which you should not touch. You should not touch it. Leave it. For example, Hölderlin nobody should never make an attempt to transform Hölderlin's poetry into movies. Or, for example, a wonderful text in German language by Georg Büchner, also early 19th century. He died very young at 22, and he wrote a prose text, Lenz, about the poet Lenz, who died very young or became insane very, very young, actually also traveling on foot. And actually part of what he traveled on foot, I traveled across the Black Forest in the Vosges Mountains in France. The text was actually made into a movie, and I always said I don't even want to look at the film, because it cannot be that somebody dares to touch this prose text, which is only prose and nothing else. It should not be made into a film, and the film is bad. And every attempt to make Lenz into a movie will fail in comparison to the text. So it's ambivalent, and I have the feeling that cinema has more affinity to music than to literature. And I have worked with great intensity in creating music for my films.
Back there.
Werner, I wanted to say thank you.
Where are you?
I'm right here.
Okay, yes.
I wanted to say thank you not only for your films, but because of the literature that you've recommended over the years, especially Virgil, reading Virgil's poetry. Yes. And there's a quote I just wanted to say to you. I'll sing of you, great Pales, and you, Apollo, famed shepherd, of Amphissus, and of you, woods and rivers of Mount Lycaeus. Now all the other themes are too well known that might have charmed an idle mind with song. Thank you for all your work.
That's very kind, but you don't need to invoke Virgil to say something nice about me. I'm very flattered, and thank you very much. but I should delete it from my memory. I won't tell my wife.
Several here, yeah.
Again, thank you so much, and for honoring poetry, which we need so much now in our world. And I think I might know a little bit about your answer, but I'd still like to ask the question. You know, cinema involves technology, and you've talked about tweets and this kind of thing and how it's robbed the world of so much. Could you please talk a little bit more about the grappling we are doing with technology? I heard the end of your book, but I still want to know more, your own feeling about technology, because cinema is a kind of technology.
Okay, I'm very much pro-technology, including the digital world, including the internet. It's only that we, as it is so new, we haven't really found an appropriate way to deal with it. It reminds me a little bit like the automobiles in the time of Elvis, where you had these gigantic kind of couches traveling, and they would guzzle 20 gallons for 50 miles or so. And everything was done by car, drive-in theaters. They have died out. We have smaller cars moving to electrical cars, so we have become smarter about it. I have seen, for example, in Las Vegas, a drive-in marriage chapel. You can marriage driving through in a car, and you may not believe it. I swear to God, I've seen it. An attorney advertising a drive-through divorce. But those grandiose days of the automobile are over, and we have learned how to deal with it in a much better way, and we have a lot of mileage ahead of us to improve. And it's a little bit like this with the digital world in the social media. By the way, I do not use a cell phone. I'm one of the holdouts, but I do it not because I'm nostalgic. Not at all. I'm always interested in the forefront, what is coming at us, and I look around and I try to make sense of it. I do not use it for cultural reasons. And I do not want to explain any deeper, but it's as simple as that. And there's nothing wrong about social media, but you have to learn, and for more than anyone else, the young ones have to learn how to deal with it. And one thing that is very encouraging for me is how 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds are navigating the internet, and they can immediately tell you, oh, this email that I see here in your inbox, this sounds really bad. And it turns out it was an advertisement written by a robot. If I click something, I have subscribed to something, and I have to pay only $11.99 a month and cannot unsubscribe unless I'm deeply into the digital world. So, and they know, and they navigate with great ease. Or my son, who is in his early 30s, who grew up with it, how he deals with news. important news and how he distinguishes the fake news or the wildly propagandistic news, accessing within seconds alternative sources and not trusting anything. And you see, when it comes to news and fake news and robots, artificial intelligence writing to you as if it was a human being speaking to you, you have to have an attitude vis-à-vis the media. Do not trust anyone. Like, we have a great achievement in our Western legal system since Roman antiquity, that there is an absolute and automatic assumption of innocence of the accused. The accused will stand trial, and he or she will be found guilty by a court of law. Only then the person is guilty. But before that, there's an absolute principle of assumption of innocence, presumption of innocence. With the media and the internet, it's exactly the opposite. There's the assumption of sin. My microphone is failing me. The assumption of fraud, of sin, of fake, and everything. But it does not mean that I hate the internet or that I hate the digital world. And on the contrary, it has glorious possibilities. And you have to navigate in this world of the internet and in the world of the poisoned mushrooms the same way tribal people or prehistoric people would roam the landscape. They would roam and pick mushrooms, and over many generations they have automatically learned, do not trust the mushrooms, but there's one I can trust. This berry I can eat. And I'm absolutely convinced, although I have not been around in prehistoric times, I'm absolutely convinced that prehistoric populations did not hate nature. They probably loved it and did the right things, automatically reaching out for the berries that are not poisonous. And that's an attitude you have to learn vis-à-vis news, vis-à-vis the internet. Assume it's all poison, it's all fake, it's all to your detriment. And you will navigate with great ease, and I see young people who do that already. So I am looking with great anticipation to this, but I think there was a...
Jamie had a question.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's really an honor to be here with you. I have sort of a big question. I've followed your career. I've seen most of your films, and I feel like more than anyone, you have explored the sort of furthest reaches of time and space, the earth, the human experience, so many, and madness. And I just wondered, like, how do you, on the one hand, sort of keep yourself from madness when you are constantly confronting these extremes? And I also wonder, given your talk of soul and, but also of deep time, like, what, after all that you've seen, like, what do you make of what we're doing here? Like, what this is all for?
Oh, yeah, that's too big a question.
I know, but I'm curious.
Yes, but let's go to the smaller and simpler question. How do I keep my sanity? I do it because I'm in intense contact with the real world, and you become, you adopt an attitude of sanity. And I'm working, much of my time I'm working in a profession that has a complete kind of fantasy and craze and imagination in it, and I stay away from it, and I do practical things. I have originally I wanted to be an athlete, to fly off ramps on skis, so a physical approach to the real world, traveling on foot. If you travel 2,000 miles on foot, you really get connected to what is our planet all about, what is life all about. So it's very instructive. And in this whole craze of Hollywood, and I do not belong to Hollywood, I'm the only one who is clinically sane.
I think there's one in the back. Remy.
Hello. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Yeah.
So in Deniz's class, we watched Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe, which was a lot of fun, but there's also a lot of questions it left me with, specifically towards the end when you were finishing the shoe in the back. You talked about how cinema, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but cinema can drive one mad. Oh. Okay. You were describing cinema and saying that it could drive one mad as it is an illusionary art. I was wondering if you could expand on this and where you think literature falls on this like kind of illusionary spectrum.
Well, a question, of course, that has engaged my mind all my life. To work too intensively, too long, and exclusively in some sort of an imaginary world is not very healthy. You have to step out. And it's good. I would advise filmmakers or poets. It's healthy and good to raise children, for example, or travel on foot, or do some essential things that are outside of the demands of permanent engagement with an illusionary world. And filmmaking has destroyed many of the best. Hardly anyone in the history of filmmaking had a longer life than, let's say, 14, 15, 16 years in making films, and then they were pushed out, or they were exhausted, or they became alcoholics, or you just name it. And I think film history, when you look into it, is full of roadkill. And very few exceptions have made films over long periods of time, over decades. And I'm one of the few exceptions, but there is only a small handful of them. And it has hit the strongest of the strong. And for example, I name Orson Welles, as strong as a bison. And he didn't make films for a long time. He exhausted himself in it, and he squandered away his everything that was in him, and he was not very prudent. And to keep your sanity and to keep connected to the real world is not that easy. So it has been a question of mine that is in the back of my head all the time, in a way. The same thing is, I was on a short book tour for the publication of my memoirs. You cannot do it too often. You talk yourself empty. And, or for example, here the retrospective, I do it for 4 days and then it has to be over. And for the next year, I will not show up at any screening of any of my films. So you have but you have to maintain a certain amount of connectedness that is outside the illusion.
Yes. So speaking of illusion and of time, I see Susan got up. So that's the signal that we are out of time, unfortunately. I'm sure there are many more questions. Maybe you'll get a chance to ask them in the foyer. But it's been a great honor and pleasure, Werner. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah, and I thank you, and thank you. Thank you.